Well, it's good to be home again, and this is home. I don't know if you remember, but we were here for 20 years. I want my son to stand up. Go on, Caleb, stand up. Do you remember when he was a little baby? Some of you remember when he was still in diapers. Well, he grew up here, and it's nice to have Caleb and Danielle, his girlfriend from Watford. Thanks for coming. And I hope they come many more times. They're just up the road. You probably want to know what we're doing now. Judy is not with me this time, but in August, Judy will be coming with me. So we'll come back here, and she is aching to see all the pictures of everybody. So I have promised to take as many pictures as possible. And she is loving it back in United States, in Pennsylvania. We do have a spare room, so whenever you want to come through, we have a spare bed for any of you that want to come by there. You pay the airfare, though, however. It's terrific not only to be back here, but also to be engaging as I do. Now, for those of you who wonder what we're now doing, I'm not retired. I don't know what people thought that I was retiring. I'm refired, or maybe retread, probably is a better word. I'm back in the States as a base to go all over the world now. And one of the things that we're doing, what we have found is that this engagement with apologetics and polemics is not really for Europe. It's not for America. It's mostly for Africa and for Asia and South America. It's for the Southern Hemisphere, because that's where the polemicists are, and that's where Islam is moving down into. And they're coming down in a very big way. Last year, just a few months ago, I was in 4 African countries. I was in Zambia, I was in Ghana, I was in Togo, and I was up in Ethiopia. And there, I was invited to come mainly because they wanted to hear apologetics and polemics, which is my area of expertise. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you? So let me define terms. When you talk about apologetics, that's the defense, and it's just like a football team. You have a good defense, and you actually keep the others from scoring. In Christianity, that's what we call apologetics, and we're pretty good at apologetics because we have most every school, every Bible school or seminary has a course on apologetics. I got my first master's degree in Christian apologetics, but when I was learning apologetics, I never learned how to defend against Islam. It was always against the atheists and the humanists, and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, those kind of apologetics. So I learned of the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, certainly the ontological argument, and what they call the moral argument. These are the arguments we have to use when we're talking with atheists. But the problem is none of these make any sense with Muslims because they already believe in God. They just got the wrong God. So having to change gears suddenly, coming to London back in 1992 and realizing that the men and women I'm up against were asking completely different questions. When I was learning apologetics, we were taught how to deal with the problem of suffering. Usually, Muslims are the ones that cause the suffering, so that's not a problem. That is an engagement that I have to take with them because of the history of 1,400 years of suffering under Islam around the world. And I don't apologize for saying that. I'm going to say it this afternoon when I'm at Speaker's Corner. What's fascinating is I was taught all these apologetical lessons, but I was never ever taught to go on the offense. Now, when you're playing a football game, you need a good defense, right? But that's not what wins the game. The men and women who win the game are the strikers who score against the other team, right? The midfields. They're the most important and most well-known of all the players, the Lionel Messis of the world, the Cristiano Ronaldos. And you can ask my son, he's a defense, but he knows he needs an offense to win the game. Am I correct, Caleb? Please help me here. Say yes. I trained you well. Please, at one time in the world, say yes. He's a defense. You can see he hates the offense. But can you see, we need to have the offense. The problem is we don't teach this in our seminaries. We don't teach this in our Bible schools. There is not one course in the world, not one school in the world that would ever teach polemics. That's the word they use, polemics, against Islam. For one very good reason. You wouldn't live very long if you did. Now, because of polemics, I have got my doctoral thesis. In fact, I'm the only one in the world that has a doctorate on polemics, Islamic polemics. You're looking at, I'm it. But I want to make sure that there are hundreds and hundreds. Bob, why don't you stand up? Here is the guy that's taking over from me. Give him a hand. You can sit down now. The problem is he came to Speaker's Corner a week after I had already left. His timing was all wrong. because I wanted to give them a whole year where I could have trained them up on how to engage with Muslims face to face. See, with Islam, they are a religion of polemics. They are engaging with polemics. They know it and understand it, and the reason why is because of this book. This book is full of polemics. It attacks the heathens, it attacks the idolaters, it attacks the Christians, it attacks the Jews, it attacks anybody who is not a Muslim. If you have any doubt, read the book. But none of you have read this book, have you? You're not taught to read this book. They don't want you. They means the schools and the pundits and the government does not want you to read this book. Even the Muslims don't really want you to read this book because they don't read this book because it's very confusing. Try to read it in English and see if you can understand it. It's so confusing. Are there any complete stories in this book? One. Just one. The story of Joseph in Surah 12. That's it. It's completely different than this book. You notice which is bigger? There's a reason why I keep it bigger. The bigger, the better book. Because this book has complete stories all the way through it. Am I correct? This book you can read in every language. Am I correct? This book you can only read in Arabic. They don't believe that this book can be read in any other language. So I have mine in English and in Arabic, but the English is nothing more than the interpretation of the meaning of the Noble Quran. They don't believe you can really read this because Arabic is God's holy language, which suggests to me God only speaks one language. My God speaks every language. My God can be understood in every language. So who's got the bigger God? Ooh, come on home. You can just use these kind of discussions and arguments with Muslims, and that's why I love working with Muslims, because they're the easiest to engage with. The difficulty is we don't have people that can do what I'm doing, people that are actually engaged like that. So what we're doing, we're going to Africa. I went to Ghana last year, and we trained up 500 pastors in Ghana, all from the north of Ghana, in Accra. They came to Accra, but they're all from the north. And they started to tell me why they had come to be trained up in apologetics and polemics. And they said, because in our lifetime, in the last 25 years, the entire northern area of Ghana has become Islamic. They said it's not a luxury for us to learn apologetics. It is a necessity where we need to learn this material for our own survival. We then went next door to Togo, which is French-speaking, so we had to turn everything into French. Judy and I speak French because we spent 5 years in Senegal. And there we were expecting 250 pastors to come. 500 showed up. We didn't know where to put them all from the north of Togo. Again, the exact same story. Jay, we have watched Islam take over our towns, take over our villages. They've imposed all their dress code. They've imposed their Islamic law. They're imposing in every area of life. We need help. We need someone to tell us how to confront this religion. And that's why we're now in Togo. I asked at the very end of the week in Ghana, how many of those who have now heard Apology and Polemics, of the 500 that were there, how many are going to use what we trained them? 400 raised their hands. I asked the same question in Togo. 400 raised their hands again. I have never seen this kind of reaction. If I were to ask that here in United Kingdom, maybe 2 or 3 would raise their hands. Can you see now why I'm now spending my time in Africa? I went to Zambia. I've never been to Zambia in my life before. I was asked to come to Lusaka by the bishop, Dr. Bishop Joshua Banda, the head of the Pentecostal church. These are all Pentecostals, your background. That's why you like them. And he said, we want you to come here and we want you to train up. We want to bring 40 leaders to listen to you. These are from all different denominations. So they got one of the largest churches in Lusaka, and we were in the antechamber there. And so I was there, and I was going to, for 2 days, I was going to give them 14 lectures. And I had it all planned out, what the 14 lectures I was going to give them. I was not 15 minutes into my talk when Dr. Banda got up and says, can I please have the microphone? Please sit down, Mr. Smith. So I sat down obediently. He turned to me, and he gave me a lecture for 10 minutes. He said, Dr. Smith, what are you doing telling us about how to love Muslims? You have no idea how to love Muslims. You're an American. You are not living amongst Muslims. You're not engaging. He got that wrong. I am engaged with Muslims. He says, you have no idea how to love Muslims in America. We do. We understand what it means to love Muslims. It's not the Muslims that are the problem, he said. It's Islam's the problem. Not the people, it's the religion. He said, don't tell us how to get along with Muslims because you don't even know, you in America don't know how to get along with Muslims because you don't have them. They're not in your cities. They're not taking over your governments. They're not taking over all your laws and institutions. He says, we asked you to come here to teach us apologetics and polemics. Don't waste our time. I had to rip up all my 14 lectures, throw them away, and I was so embarrassed. I've never been lectured like that for 10 minutes, but I was rejoicing inside because finally I found men and women who finally wanted to learn how to confront Islam. And that's when the penny dropped for me. And I realized it's not the Europeans that are going to confront Islam. It's going to be the Africans. They're way ahead of you Europeans. They have no fear like you have here. I'm not saying you in this room. I found out here in Europe, the Europeans are fearful of Islam. They are in America as well, because they have no idea of what Islam is doing around the world. But you know, what I love about Islam is that it has no foundation. Now, let me give you a story, and I've done it here before. You've heard it before. Let's talk about this aircraft carrier. I introduced it before. Did any of you hear me talk about the USS Enterprise? Nobody? Where were you the last time I talked? Didn't I talk about it, Paul, before? Yeah, you're saying that because I just did it an hour ago. He remembers what I said an hour ago. This aircraft carrier, one of the largest ships on the face of the earth, was plying the Pacific in the middle of the night. And those on the bridge, they saw a light coming towards them. And so they flashed the signal to the light, please turn 5 degrees to port, otherwise we will collide. And back came the reply, no, you turn 5 degrees to port. So they sent another message, we're not asking you, we're demanding you turn 5 degrees to port. Back came the reply, I'm not asking, I'm demanding you turn 5 degrees to port. Well, they had to wake up the captain because they didn't know what to do next. And the captain was quite upset, having been woken up in the middle of the night. He comes up to the bridge and he says, send this message. This is the USS Enterprise. We are one of the largest fighting ships on the face of the earth. We have 80 of the finest fighting aircraft. We have 300 of the finest fighting Marines. We have a complement of 5,000 soldiers. I demand you turn 5 degrees to port. Signed, Captain Hornblower, captain of the USS Enterprise. After a little while came back the response. I don't care whether you are the largest ship on the face of the earth. I don't care whether you have 80 or 100 of the finest fighting aircraft. You could have 300 to 500 of the finest fighting Marines. To take 5,000 or 10,000, I don't care how many men you have on board, I would still suggest you turn 5 degrees to port. Signed, Henry Linkletter, keeper of the lighthouse. Now, can you see why I'm doing this? That aircraft carrier is just like Islam, am I correct? It's big, it's formidable. If you look at the last 1,400 years of its history, you will see that in every culture it has gone, it has dominated that culture, it has eradicated that culture, and it's replaced its own culture with it, its own dress code, its own language, its own food, hygienic code. Everywhere it goes, it destroys the culture and imposes its own culture, just like aircraft carriers, huge, dominable, fearful. But if that aircraft carrier kept on going without turning right or left, who do you think would have won that battle? One little lighthouse. Why? Because the aircraft carrier has no foundation. It's just floating on water. Whereas that lighthouse has a foundation that goes right to the center of the earth. And we are that lighthouse. Remember as little kids, we used to sing, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Remember that little song? We only need one light. And Christ says, don't keep that light under a barrel. Make sure that light shines. Because that light goes to the center of history. That light is based on this foundation. Islam is based on this foundation. The little one. But this book is what every Muslim is dependent on. With this book is the book that they basically authorizes everything they're to do, modeled on one man named Muhammad. The book and the man, the book and the man. This book is our foundation. Now, does Paul ever open up this book when he's preaching? Please say yes. Does he read from it? Please say yes. Does he exegete it and apply it to your lives? Please say yes. You've passed that test, Paul. I know you do, because I've seen you many times. And he holds that book up here. Doesn't he do that? Why? Because that shows where his authority comes from. It's not his opinion, because you don't care diddly squat about his opinion. It is what the book says. It is what the Bible says. Even the songs we're singing come out of this book. And they all point to whom? Who have we been pointing to all morning? Jesus, the man in this book. This whole book points to one man. So we start from the same paradigm that they do. They have a book modeled by a man. We have a bigger book modeled by a bigger man. So everything I do is to confront this book and the man behind this book. That's my job. That's Bob's job. That's Alistair's job. Now I want Alistair to stand up. You remember Alistair? Well, Alistair's working with me now, and he is my technician. He is in charge of all my live streaming. You can go and sit down now. Thank you, Alistair. But he is actually getting his degree here at LST. This is little Alistair who didn't know a thing about it and was so arrogant. Remember how arrogant he used to be? Thank you, Alistair. I had to say that. Go talk to him now. God has really touched his life. And what's beautiful about Alistair, he got me into LST on Friday. I'm not supposed to be at LST. I'm much too toxic for LST. But he got students to come, and we had a great time on Friday where we unpacked this new material, and we had a question and answer period. Now, the great thing about that is this is the next generation. We're trying to encourage people to actually understand how to confront Islam, but to do it academically, not to do it with opinions. I'm not interested in people's opinions. I'm not even interested in people's experiences. I want people to go back and confront the foundations. What we're now doing, and Alistair is the one that's been the spearhead of this, we're now starting to use live stream. Live stream is where we're actually engaging live on YouTube with Muslims from all over the world. It's a little bit like Speaker's Corner on the internet. So starting in June, we've already done a few, but starting in June, we'll be advertising when I'll be on, and usually I'm with another scholar. Sometimes Al-Fadi, who is in America. This is a Saudi Arabian that I'm working with. He was born in Saudi Arabia. He was born in Medina, where the Prophet was born. He speaks Quranic Arabic. More than that, he can exegete Quranic Arabic, and on top of that, he speaks fluent English. He used to be a Muslim, was a Salafi Muslim, joined Al-Qaeda, and then met Jesus Christ, fell in love with Jesus. Who can't help but fall in love with Jesus? He has now come home. He and I work together. Though I know Arabic, he knows it a lot better than I do. What's more, he's doing his PhD on one of the most influential manuscripts, the Sana'a manuscript. So this man is going to be the world authority on the Sana'a manuscript. That's why he's great to have on board. So we're going to be doing these live streams. Alistair is going to be creating it. And what's great is Alistair has been looking at the hundreds and hundreds of comments that come on the screen. And he's going to be picking out all the best comments, the ones that are really engaging. We don't care about trolling. We don't want the trollers to get control of us. We want those Muslims who are actually questioning, who are taking what we are saying, questioning what we are saying, and he throws them at us and says, Jay, you need to answer that one. That's from Nigeria. Here's another one from Indonesia. Here's another one from Norway. And we're getting people from all over the world. And he just keeps throwing question after question. And I engage with the person that's actually questioning, and then we open it up so people can live question us. It is so much fun. But folks, in every case, we win every debate. We win every debate. And the reason why is because of this book and the man behind this book. Now, what we're going to do, and I've just come from Poland. I was just in Poland at a big conference. That's why I'm here today. This last week, there were 700 leaders from all over Europe. And I was one of the keynote speakers there, and they wanted me to introduce this new material, this new historical material that confronts the Quran. See, up to now, we've not had the chance to really confront the Quran intrinsically. We've only talked about the Quran, looked at all the problems within the Quran. Oh, we've talked about the diacritical corrections, the diacritical variants in the book. But the reason we're now engaging at a much deeper level is because of new research that's just come out. Let me explain what I'm doing. Every Muslim you meet, whether they are radical, nominal, maybe not the liberals, but they only make up around 2% worldwide, 15% here in Britain. So the vast majority of Muslims are either nominal or radical. The ones you meet here in Harrow will either be in these two groups. And every Muslim all over the world believes in four things about the Quran. Number one, they would say that the Quran has always existed. The reason they say that is because the Quran makes that claim in chapter 85, verse 22. This book has never been created. It has always existed, co-eternal with God, which, Paul, you can see that's a theological contradiction, isn't it, for Islam? Because if Islam says God is one, how can he have a book coexisting with him eternally? Ooh, I love that one. That's not for today. That's the first claim they make. They believe that also that this book was sent down to a man named Muhammad between 610 and 632, that 22-year period, first in Mecca, then in Medina. Number 3, that this book was finally composed and compiled completely at the time of Uthman in 652, so mid-7th century. And number 4, that this book I have in my hand today is exactly that like the book that was compiled by Uthman, the book that was sent down to Muhammad, and the book that exists in heaven. It is exactly the same. Every sentence is the same. Every chapter is the same. Every word is the same. Every letter is the same. Even every dot is the same. That's the claims they make. See if I'm wrong. Ask any Muslim friend, where does this book come from? They have to say that because the Quran makes that claim. They have to say it because they cannot have any book that has any human intervention. Otherwise, it's no longer their authority. So can you see the dilemma they're in? Which makes my job really easy. All I have to do is confront the last 2 claims. The first 2 I wouldn't confront because how can you talk about eternality? I'm not there in heaven. How can I talk about whether Muhammad received it? I'm not there in the 7th century. But I can confront the last 2 points. Complete and unchanged. All you have to do is memorize 4 words. Eternal, sent down, complete, and unchanged. Can you memorize those 4? And then ask your Muslim friend, is your Quran eternal, sent down, complete, and unchanged? Can you do that? Because I'm going to tell you what you can do next. Once they say yes to those 4, then pretty much you've won the argument. I'll show you how. Just ask about the last 2, complete and unchanged. Ask them to show you one manuscript of any Quran anywhere that is complete. That means 114 surahs, 114 books, 114 chapters, and is unchanged. That means exactly parallels this book I have in my hand today. This is known as the Hafs Quran. Hafs because it's named after the man who created it. His name is Hafs. Already you can see there's a problem there. I thought it was eternal. I thought it came from Muhammad. Who's Hafs and what's his name on this book for? You'll see why. So what you can do is ask them, show us one book that's complete, 114 surahs, from the 7th century that is exactly like the book we have in our hand today. That's easy to do, isn't it? See if any Muslim can answer you. Not one. There is no Muslim in the world that can answer those 3 questions. One book from the 7th century, complete, 114 surahs, that is unchanged. And the reason why, because there is no manuscript of any Quran at all from the 7th century. None exist. There are 6 major Qurans that have been found that are known as the earliest manuscripts. There's the Topkapı, which is the one in Istanbul. That was created in the first half of the 8th century up until around the mid of the 8th century. It's about 98% of the Quran, 8th century. Then you have the Tashkent manuscript, which is the Samarkand manuscript in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. That one is only 43 surahs. 43 surahs, it's supposed to be 114, right? So half the Quran's missing. It's again from the early 8th century, but it is so full of errors. It has so many contradictions. The Islamic scholars are saying don't even use it because it's put together by amateurs. The grammar is so convoluted. It has so many variants that no scholar will use it anymore. Then there's the one here in the British Library. It's right downtown. You can go to the British Library. That's called the Ma'il Quran, the 2165 manuscript. That is from the late 8th century. It only goes up to Surah 43. It's not complete. Full of manuscript variants. From the late 8th century. Then you can go across the water, across the channel to Paris, to the Bibliothèque Nationale, to the Petropolitanus manuscript, which is only 27% of the Quran. It is from the early 8th century. It already, just within the 27% that we've looked at, we can already find 93 variants. Does not agree with the Quran we have today. And then if you want to go down to Egypt, you can go to the Cairene manuscript, known as the Husseini manuscript. That one is from the 9th century. It has hundreds upon hundreds, did I say hundreds? Thousands of coverings, proving that it is not the same Quran that we have today, and it's not complete. And then the last, probably the most exciting, is the Sana'a manuscript, discovered in 1975 in Yemen. That one we're now looking at it. It's the earliest of all the manuscripts. It's dated to 705. but it has a lower script that's bled through over the centuries because it's written on animal skin. And when you write on animal skin, you can wash it off. And when you wash it off, you think that you have destroyed all the evidence, right? Well, that may be the case. But after hundreds of years, the ink starts to bleed through, which it is now doing. We can now see the ink underneath. We have now separated the lower and the upper text. This lower layer is the only part of the Quran that is from the 7th century. It does not agree with the upper layer. It has 63 verses. There are 70 manuscript variants. It doesn't agree with the upper layer, and it doesn't agree with the Quran we have in our hand today. Ooh, Can you see how easy my job is? Makes my job so easy. Now, back in 2010, we had a scholar. His name was Dr. Daniel Brubaker. He's on our team. He was doing his doctoral studies at Rice University in Texas. And he decided that he wanted to look and see if he could find just one manuscript that had one correction. All he needed was to find one correction. Because if there's a correction, that means there's been human intervention. That means someone has changed it. A human has changed it. God doesn't come to earth. Allah is incapable of entering time and space, so it couldn't be God doing it. It has to be a human, right? You following that? One correction would be what he was satisfied with. Now, he was given permission. He's the only one that has had this permission to go to all the major manuscripts. He went to the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Husseini, the Ma'il, the Petropolitan, and the Sanam. But he also went to 4 others in St. Petersburg, also in Doha, in Qatar. He went to all the 10 major manuscripts that are in existence today, the 6 major ones and the 4 others that come after, and he took pictures of all of them. He did his doctoral thesis in 2014. He gave it to me in 2014. I was the first to look at it. I challenged Dr. Shabir Ali, the world's leading authority on the Quran, to a debate in 2014 in September 29th at Toronto, there in a big church. Dr. Shabir Ali, who had debated me 5 times before, agreed to the debate, and he let me go first. That was his undoing. He should never let me go first. Because all I had to do is hold up this material from Dr. Brubaker's thesis. There were 800 corrections that he had found. 800 corrections. Now, I just held them up from a distance. No one could see them because I was not permitted to let anybody see them because these had not yet been published. That was in 2014. Since 2014, we put that up that night on YouTube. 500,000 people have now watched that debate. We know of 300 Muslims that have given their life to Jesus Christ because of that one debate. Now, it gets worse than that. That was 2014. He has continued to do his research. Tomorrow, this book is going to be in print, and you can order it. Get this book. This is the first published piece that's ever been produced showing just 22. It says 20, but I've asked him to add 2 more. This is a pre-publication copy. Yet he still calls it 20 examples. This is the first published book that's ever been published anywhere in the world that's going to actually show 22 examples of those variants. Buy it and just show your Muslim friend. Just walk through and just show them all these. Let me just show you from here so you can see. Look at this one here. Can you tell that this is a different ink than this? That lahum there, you don't have to know Arabic. You can see that visually, right? That's written at a later date in a different nim, and it's a totally different word than what used to be here. It's been erased and then reproduced over top. Let me show you this one here. This is the cover. Notice, that's different ink. Here's a word that's been put in the margin. That's been added at a later date. Here's another variant. There are 4 variants on the same page. Can you see that from where you're sitting? What in the world are they putting different words in, and why is it they forgot to take this one out? This one is supposed to be erased so that one could put over top of it. Why are they correcting all these corrections? Look at this one here. This is from the Husseini manuscript. Everywhere you see a green arrow is a covering. There are 8 coverings where they've covered over top and not written anything. Why do you think they covered all those places? Because what's left behind, what is now, what we can see with our eye, parallels this book. Do we do that to our Bible? Have we done that anywhere with the archaic manuscripts of the Bible? Do we have problems like this? Do we even make that claim? See, we don't even make that claim about our Bible, do we? Do we say our Bible is eternal? No. Has Paul ever said that? Shame on you if he did. Of course it's not eternal. We know when Moses wrote, he wrote in 1400 BC, 3,400 years ago. We don't put his name on the book. We know the 5 books he wrote. Most of the authors who wrote books, we put their names on. Isaiah wrote Isaiah, Jeremiah wrote Jeremiah, John wrote John, Matthew wrote Matthew. So we put the names of the authors, meaning they are written by men. We know that they were not in heaven. We know that they were inspired by God, but written by men. So the first point, we would never claim for our Bible. Secondly, was our Bible sent down from tablets down to earth? Absolutely not. We would never make that claim. Sent down? No. These are men living on earth. They were men who actually used their own experience, their own writing styles, their own testimony. And that's why you have 4 testimonies of Jesus Christ from 4 different perspectives. So we know 4 witnesses of who he was, what he said, what he did. Were they complete? That we would agree with. Number 3, we'd agree that they were complete at one time, but we don't have the original autographs. Now, we do have quite a few good material. We don't just have 6 manuscripts. We have actually 9,500 versions in 11 different languages. We have 5,300 Greek manuscripts. We have 10,000 Latin Vulgates. You add that up together, that's about 24,000 manuscripts we can go to. They only have 6. Ooh, I like that. We have 365 of them that are either complete or partial that exist before the 6th century. That's 100 years before Islam. And we have the whole entire New Testament right here in London, in the British Library, the Sinaiticus from the 4th century, the early 4th century, 325 AD, possibly commissioned by Constantine himself. Right next to it, in the cabinet right next to it, is the Alexandrinus, which is from the 5th century. That's 200 years before the Quran. If you go to Rome, you get the Vaticanus. Those are 3 metropolitan codices, complete codices, that exist 300 to 200 years before the Quran. Look at the treasure trove we have for our Bible. But we don't have the originals. But we don't need the originals because we don't just have the manuscript evidence. We also got the translation, 19,800 translations in 11 different languages. If we had wanted to corrupt it or change it or manipulate or accrete it or delete it, we'd have to go to every one of those 19,800 lectionary, and we'd have to go and change every one of them in all 11 languages so they all agreed. Now you tell me, what's a bigger miracle? But we have something even better than that. We have the early church fathers' quotations. 86,000 of them that we have. 36,000 of them which predate the 4th century. That means they come before, 300 years before even the Quran. If you just look at just take the Gospel of John, we can go back to the early church fathers' quotations. That's Tertullian. That's looking at all the great Polycarp, all these great early church fathers, and just look and see what they did with the Gospel of John. You can recreate the entire Gospel of John from their quotations before the 4th century, except for 11 verses. Ooh, Ooh, I love my Bible. Can you see how easy it is to defend the Bible? So we don't even make the claim they make, and yet we can come up with a better manuscript evidence than they have for their Quran. Now, this book, these corrections, have nothing to do with the dots above and below the lines. See, Muslims don't know what's going to hit them this afternoon. We're going to take this book down to Speaker's Corner. I'm going to get up on the ladder, and I'm going to introduce this book. And I'm going to introduce all 22 of the variants. This will be the first time in public that we're actually going to show the Muslims that the very earliest manuscripts, we don't just have 800 corrections, we now have 4,000. Remember, I only had 800 in 2014. We're up to 4,000 of these manuscripts. And these are not just insertions. These are erasers. These are coverings. Every time you see an eraser, that means someone has taken and they have actually erased it. Look at this eraser here. Can you see that big smudge? That used to be 2 words. We don't know what those 2 words are, but now they've erased it and left it blank because now what's left over corresponds with this book, the Hafs text. So, what do we mean by the Hafs text? See, Hafs was a student who died in 796. Muhammad died in 632. 144 years after Muhammad died, he finally put together this Quran. That's 144 years later. But he didn't even live in Arabia. He lived in Kufa, which is the south of Baghdad. He lived in Iraq. He was an Abbasid background. It is that text that has become the official text But it didn't start that way. That text was made the official text in 1924. Not even 100 years ago. 1924, that was 95 years ago, that text was made official in one city, in Cairo. Only for the city of Cairo, because they were doing standardized testing, and they realized in the high schools that they were getting all these different answers from all the different students, and they needed to have one unified test. So they went to Al-Azhar University, and they asked Muhammad ibn al-Haddad, who is the senior scholar at that time, if he could just choose one script in Arabic that they could use as their standard text. And he chose Hafs from the 8th century. That became the standard for all of Cairo. Any other Quran that they found, they took out into the Nile and they dumped it into the Nile. Means they're still there today. That became so successful that the Egyptian government decided to make this the text for all of Egypt in 1936, known as the Farouk edition, named after King Farouk, who took power in 1936. Because of the success of the Egyptian model, just this country of Egypt, Ibn Saud family, King Fahd in Saudi Arabia, decided to make this the official text for the entire world in 1985. Many of you in this room are older than 1985, am I correct? Which means any of you who were born before 1985, you're older than the Quran. How does that make you feel? Can you see how damaging this is? This idea that this book is eternal, this idea that this book was sent down, this idea that it was complete at the time of Uthman, we're going to show thousands, not just hundreds, thousands of differences. We're going to prove now that this book has been manipulated by men all the way through, that it was continued to be changed, continued to be corrected. Up until 1985, it was still being corrected, because how do you get any of those corrections unless you have a standard to correct them to? And when was the standard finally finalized? I leave that for you to decide. Ooh, I love this. Now, put yourself as a Muslim. What does this do to your faith? What does it do to your Quran? If this is God's holy book, if this is the only authority you have, remember, they have nothing bigger, they have nothing more than one book. Muhammad is dependent on this book. The only person that this book supposedly talks about is supposedly Muhammad. How many times is Muhammad's name in this book? That's it, 4 times. How many times is Jesus' name in this book? 93 times. Who do you think is more important? I would suggest you go to Isa. The problem is I don't want to go to Isa. He's not my Jesus. That is not my Jesus. That Jesus spends his whole time as a child telling his mother how to eat in Surah 19. Didn't know a mother needed to know how to eat. I thought certainly a child should not know better than his mother. Takes some clay, puts them into birds, and blows on them in chapter 3, verse 49. Denies his divinity in chapter 5, verse 116. Refuses to get on the cross in chapter 4, verse 157. And if Jesus did not get on the cross, then I'm damned, and so are all of you. Unless God died on the cross, we have no future. One verse, chapter 4, verse 157, destroys everything I know about my Jesus. That's why he is not my Jesus. Do not accept Isa. Don't even accept that name, because Isa is not even Arabic. That is not Jesus' name in Arabic. The name for Jesus in Arabic is Yeshua. Has always been Yeshua up until the 9th century, up until 868, when we found the first translation of the Bible into Arabic. And guess whose name is in the pages? Yeshua is there amongst the Christian community. So where did Isa come from if he's not Arabic? Well, he comes from the Gnostic writers. Iesu is the Syriac name for Jesus. Every story that you see in the Quran comes out of the Syriac documents. They borrowed the story, they borrowed the Jesus, they borrowed the name. They've got the wrong Jesus. We have the real Jesus. We have the real God. Because even the God's name here is not a name. Allah is not a name. It's nothing more than a generic title, the God. But we now know who Allah is. We now know where he comes from. We have also the antecedents, because Allah is borrowed from the Nabatean script. Allah is a Nabatean God. Ilah is his name in Nabatean. But Ilah is nothing more than the God of Dushara, which is the name for God of the Nabateans. Dushara temples are all over the northern part, where we know of Petra, and Medina, Hegada, Medina. These are the places where the Nabateans had their temples. Dushara is that god, but here's what really gets interesting. Allah is the generic title for that god, but Dushara and Allah have a wife. Her name is Alat. Her name is Al-Uzza. Alat is the generic title for Al-Uzza. Alat is the feminine form of Allah. Ooh, Any of you who have read the Quran know what I'm talking about, because in chapter 53 of this book, in verse 19 and 20, it talks about Al-Uzza and Alat and Al-Manat. These are the three goddesses known as the satanic verses made popular by Salman Rushdie. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? Look what happened to him when he introduced that, proving that the goddesses that are in this book are actually the wives of the God of Islam. But hold on a minute, I thought God was one. In chapter 6, verse 101, it says God can't have no wife. Then what's he doing with a wife called Alat? Ooh, I love that. They've got the wrong God. We've got the real God. My God has no wife, but he does have a son. And what's his name? Jesus. And what's his name in Arabic now? Yeshua. Don't call him Issa, call him Yeshua. Now, what we're going to do this afternoon, and if you all are free, come on down, watch what happens. You don't have to participate, just look from a distance. Look and see what's going to happen and see how the Muslims are going to respond. How would you respond if you were a Muslim hearing this? Because everything I have done in the last 45 minutes does not, except for my last bit where I'm talking about Jesus, notice that everything I have done has been from an academic standpoint. This has nothing to do with Christianity. This is a neutral argument. This is a historical argument. This is a redaction criticism. This is called source criticism. This is called literary criticism. I'm using the criticisms that were all invented in Germany, used against the Bible. I'm now applying them against the Quran, which means anybody can use this. And every religion has to go through this test. Redacted criticism, source criticism, literary criticism, all the historical criticisms were all invented on the Bible. In Germany, in Tübingen, with Wellhausen and the others, in the late 1800s. By 1905, it decimated the church along with Darwinianism, and the church has never recovered here in Europe because we hadn't done our homework. Now we've gone back and we have found answers to every one of these criticisms. That's why I love this book. It has passed every test. The documentary hypothesis, the redacted criticism, and you look through and you look at almost every one of the historical criticisms to the point that today we can't find one artifact, not one stela, not one mural, not one obelisk, not one tablet anywhere in the world that controverts a proper biblical statement. We can't find one artifact that controverts this book. What a Bible we've got. What a foundation we have. Now we're going to destroy this book this afternoon. I'm not going to destroy it. I'm just going to ask some very disturbing questions. This will do the same thing that happened in the late 1800s. It will filter down because we have the internet. We have YouTube. We can go much quicker than what they could in Germany. This is going to filter down into the madrasas. This is going to filter down into the mosques. And this is going to filter down to the people on the streets. This argument is an academic argument. It's meant for academics. It's meant for the next leaders, the next generation of Muslim leaders. Can you see how this is going to destroy their foundations? How would you defend this if you were a Muslim? Now, none of you, I don't think, are academics. You don't know Arabic. But can you understand everything I've said this morning? This anybody can understand. I'm going to end, though, by looking back to the claims they made. Remember the claims they made for this book? Eternal, sent down, complete, unchanged. There, you got it. You already memorized it. We would not make that claim for this book, right? But is this the only word of God we have? Do we have another word of God? The word of God, the Logos. What's his name? Jesus. That word of God did come to earth, did he not? Took on human form. Okay, let's ask those 4 questions. Is Jesus eternal? Ooh, I love that. Was he sent down? Yes. Is Jesus complete? Yes. Is Jesus unchanged? Yes. Woo! Everything the Muslims want, we've already got. Everything they're looking for, we've already got. Folks, we need to bring him home. We need to bring him home. And that's exactly what we're going to do this afternoon. Everything we're going to do this afternoon will be filmed. It'll be put up on Fander Films. Go up on Fander Films. You'll probably be up there either tomorrow or the day after. and get this book, because all you need to do is take this book and give it to your Muslim friends. It's called Corrections in the Early Quran Manuscripts. A lot of people in the last session came and took pictures of it on their iPhones. Just come up with your iPhone and take pictures of this, and in order, it'll be on Amazon by tomorrow. Then all you need to do is give it to your Muslim friend, but just look at the pictures, point to the pictures and say, what's that doing? Let me show you this one here. Here's a great one to show them when I get to it. It's here. Show them this one here. Here are 9 complete different pages. In every case, the name of Allah has been added at a later date. Whoever wrote this manuscript forgot the name of God, proving that Allah probably didn't exist prior to this. There's 9 examples. There's actually 12. He didn't have enough place to put it. We're finding hundreds and hundreds of these cases where they have to put Allah's name at a later date. How can you forget God's name? Unless he's not the real God. Ooh, I love that. Can you see what we can do with this? Just show it to your Muslim friends, let them read it, and then come back the next week and have them talk to you about it. Because what you're going to be doing by just handing them this little book, it's only 100 pages. It's written for people who are lay people, not for the academics. This is written for people who don't have to know all this academia like I'm speaking today. And it's so that you can encourage your Muslim friends not to ever make this claim again, that the Quran is eternal. Not to ever make the claim again that it came down to a man named Muhammad. Not to ever make the claim again that it was complete, and certainly that it's unchanged. Don't even make those claims anymore. You can only make that claim about Jesus Christ, our Word of God.